Hello and welcome back to another episode of Dark Souls 3 Dissected. Today's video is something of an addendum to my previous episode on the invisible walls and weird collisions of Dark Souls 3. I got a lot of great feedback on some oddities that I missed, and though my original intention was just to leave a pinned comment with links to screenshots taking a closer look at them, I realized there was some pretty neat stuff in here that would just be easier to show in video, and then I might as well showcase it where more people will see it. So here's a closer look at 10 more janky collisions in Dark Souls 3, Viewer Response Edition. Number 1. The Smouldering Lake Crystal Lizards. Cafalino9687 and a bunch of others pointed out that the crystal lizards of the Smouldering Lake have a nasty habit of sometimes falling out of bounds in that one hallway cave area. Taking a closer look, I first noticed some gaps between the floor and walls that you can see here. You would think that this is probably the culprit, but the lizards are too big to fit through here and this doesn't appear to be the problem. For whatever reason, a steep enough angle between the floor and wall, that is, where the wall's collision isn't perfectly upright and is leaning towards you a bit, just seems to be problematic with the lizard's collision in general. I mentioned in the video that squeezing under a descending ramp of collision could be a problem, and I think this is where we're seeing that. I found a few spots down here with steep angled walls that a lizard can clip through, regardless if there's a gap between the floor and wall or not. So it appears that this would have been avoidable if the wall's collisions were perfectly upright or leaning back slightly, instead of leaning forwards. I believe this is the same reason the bone wheels in Dark Souls 1 can reliably clip through the wall here too. Number 2. The Vordt Skip. Next up we have the Vordt Skip, as pointed out to me by Arav. Would have loved to see the kill camera playing here, because you can trigger it by riposting an enemy while in the corner at the bottom of the stairs. This allows the player to skip Vordt if they haven't triggered the fog wall. So yeah, to see how this is possible, let's take a closer look at the death cam placement. On this side there's a bigger gap, which is why it doesn't work when having your back to this railing. But even on the side where it can work, there's still a pretty big gap, so it's not the most egregious death cam placement, and I can see how the devs missed this. When you do a riposte, your collision capsule does push back a little bit, particularly during the part of the animation where you push the enemy away from you. But I was trying for a while and couldn't get it to work, so at first it seemed like a miracle that this was working for anyone at all. I'm just really not getting that close to the death camera plane. But then I realized that other players were switching to being barehanded as to not accidentally kill the enemy too quickly, and it turns out that that has another more primary role in triggering the death cam here. A fist riposte has a different animation than the straight sword riposte, and that particular animation does push your collision capsule quite a bit further backwards. I'll link to a video tutorial by Corporal if you'd like to see another explanation on how to do it. Number 3. Weird poison buildup on otherwise safe ground. Ross243 wanted to know why this one particular spot in front of this tree, found immediately after going through the large doorway that you have to open in the Farron Keep, triggers poison buildup. At this point, you're out of the swamp and standing on what should be safe ground. I wondered if something like an extra plane of collision of the swamp extended underneath the ground and got a little too close to the surface here. But clipping the camera through didn't reveal anything that close to underneath our feet, and trying to interact with some of the extra junk down there didn't seem to trigger poison buildup at all. I think this is likely a problem with the actual surface itself, the triangle of collision marked here in red. It's likely an incorrect value set on a hit material property, but unfortunately I haven't yet researched the tools needed for looking into how that works. If anyone else who's done that can confirm that it is just an improper value set on the ground here, rather than something weird underneath the ground that we can't see, I'd love to hear about it. Number 4. Another Undead Settlement out of bounds spot. Irithyll and a few others pointed out that there's another spot where you can get out of bounds in the Undead Settlement, and it's a known spot that's sometimes marked by player messages online. Here it is, and here's what the collision for it looks like. Getting up there is not hard to do if you wedge yourself between the corner of this building and the rock wall, and run and jump towards the rock wall. Even just sprinting without jumping can get you onto the first weird spot. Then from there, you can do another jump to get up a little further to the left, and then you can easily get onto the roof of the building as well. But going too far beyond it causes you to fall out of bounds. Number 5. Getting yeeted off the bridge by the stray demon. There's nothing really new to see here in the collisions that I didn't already show, but Bossu pointed out how, despite having the invisible enemy wall protecting the boss, and railing protection for both the player and boss by the rubble piles, there's nothing to stop the stray demon from killing you by throwing you off of the bridge with its grab attack, right in the area by where they placed him, so it's not even that unlikely. And what was most interesting to me, Bossu also noted how the world looks utterly broken from there. Indeed, it's probably the ugliest, most incomplete part of the map from any inbounds perspective in the entire game. You can see a plane of the Farron Swamp sticking out beyond the walls that just floats there and cuts off. And there's no ground down there at all, just a distant, wide-open skybox with some trees floating above it too. It's a mess. You can even see a decent amount of this without being thrown off the bridge at all by simply angling the camera down. Oops. Number 6, another out-of-bounds spot in the Cathedral of the Deep. Poto Nekoi mentioned being able to run up some weird collision on the left side of the staircase after the very first bonfire. I now remember seeing some floating messages alongside a tree there way back, and although I had gotten up to that spot before, I completely forgot about it. I had also previously tried and failed to get out of bounds from there, but with some further messing around, I found that it is possible. Without even jumping, you can get all the way up here, but an additional and kind of tricky jump is required to get further out of bounds. Once there, it's easy to either fall out of the map if you go straight forward, or if you follow the terrain to the left, you might find yourself getting stuck on the backside of invisible walls that were meant to stop you from getting back here in the first place. Looks like they just needed to be a little more consistent with invisible walls and should have included them further up the staircase as well. Number 7, the Irithyll death spot. Syntheside sent me a clip of a weird death spot in Irithyll, found in the same general location where I triggered the death cam. Running into this corner enough can clip you out of the map and shoot you down into the kill plane below, killing you instantly. It turns out that there's a gap in the collisions here, as this part of the ground doesn't really exist. This gap is a little narrower than our collision capsule, so in theory we shouldn't be able to fit through it, and this does explain why we don't just immediately fall through when stepping onto this space. But it's also apparently just wide enough to let the capsule sink into it a little bit, and that sets things up for being able to clip through it. I suspect that if this gap was only just a few centimeters more narrow, that we wouldn't be able to fall through here at all. Number 8, the Profaned Capital Tower. Something I glossed over in my video was the relative openness of the tower in the Profaned Capital. They didn't bother with invisible walls very much. They were relying on fall damage to kill the player if they dropped out of a side they weren't meant to, but careful positioning can occasionally allow you to break up your fall on some small ledges on its exterior. One particularly funny spot for doing this was brought to my attention by Safeguard Sanakin, where dropping down from the opposite side of this ladder might land you down here. It's pretty difficult to do. Most attempts will have you bumping off of some collisions and missing the landing entirely, but if you pull it off, walking in this direction will cause you to step into a kill plane and immediately die. This is because this is where the kill plane that was meant to protect and surround this walkway intersects with the side of the tower. And of course, they weren't expecting you to try and walk around the outside of the tower. Number 9, the Anor Londo lever jump. This was brought to my attention by Lovecraft HP. They said, "Hello, there's a very interesting hiding spot in Anor Londo. After the moving contraption, you can get a higher jump on the lever next to the bonfire, so you can jump over the railing and fall to the nearby roof where nobody can see you. If you walk down further, the death cam activates, and a few meters later the death box too." So this is one I wasn't able to replicate, but I trust that it's accurate given how specific the rest of the information is. Running and jumping at the lever sometimes gives you a small boost over it, or you can wind up on top of it as well. If you're able to get over the railing, landing down here safely seems very difficult because the buttress here was made to be slippery. However, if you're centered perfectly in the middle, you can land on it and walk down it. And everything they said about the death cam and kill plane is accurate as well, since walking down this will cause you to hit one before the other. Now in terms of actually getting over the railing, I'm not sure if I'm supposed to rely on a jump boost getting me over the railing in a single motion, or if I'm supposed to land on top of the lever first, and then from here do something like a running jump, which is probably only possible by doing something like a stored run by casting a buff and building up run speed in advance. Given how difficult this is to pull off, and how obscure of an out-of-bounds spot it is as well, it's not a particularly notable problem. But I did want to point it out because it reveals a potential general oversight in how From Software implements railing protection. It's something they do very commonly for railings next to staircases, but they seem to often forget about the potential for getting on top of objects and how those can be used for getting over railings sometimes. We saw this happen with the fence skip in the catacombs, we see it here as well, and in other places throughout the Souls games. So in the same way that railings on staircases usually get railing protection by default, I won't be surprised if future titles of theirs start getting more aggressive with doing the same for railings that have any kind of objects placed near them too. Number 10, more object invisible walls. In my previous video, I showed how a couple vases and one particular table create a temporary floor of object collision underneath them when you break them. Though this floor should only last a few frames, sometimes these occasionally glitch and don't go away quickly, creating glitched invisible walls that shouldn't be there. I incorrectly assumed that the tables wouldn't be an issue in the same way that the vases are, due to none of the tables being rotated, so they won't create a vertical wall. And I also sort of assumed that, due to the way that the temporary floors are clipped underneath the ground, that the player probably wouldn't be able to interact with them directly, making the glitch of getting them to freeze in place harder or impossible. As you can already gather, I was wrong on that assumption, and I've since gotten a few reports of these tables also creating these invisible walls for players, just like the vases do. Blackbeard2412, Ryan Gordon 578, and Frost Channel 4 all mention this happening to them in the Cathedral of the Deep. Something to bear in mind is that the temporary floor that spawns underneath the tables is massive. While these tables aren't rotated, so they don't seem to create any vertical invisible walls for the player, a large floor means that staircases can be easily blocked. And two of the comments did specifically mention not being able to use stairs. So we can be pretty certain that one of these getting frozen in the Cathedral of the Deep is what happened. But then I also got another video sent to me by WASD2, and this one is a lot more confusing. They ran into a temporary invisible wall in the Grand Archives as well, but I don't know what could have caused it. While it appears that the same tables show up here, this is a variant that doesn't come with the same invisible floor issue. And even if they did, I can't see how any of the ones nearby would create an invisible wall up here specifically. I checked a lot of breakable objects in the area, and none seem capable of creating a glitched wall over there, or anywhere for that matter. So this is the most confusing one yet, and I have no idea what's going on. If someone else could figure it out, that'd be great. Okay, so that was 10 more things I would have included in the last video had I remembered or knew about them at all. But before I close this video out, I did want to include a couple more honorable mentions, more notable for their viewer feedback, rather than really having anything else to share about their collisions. That weird enemy wall in the Smouldering Lake that seems completely unnecessary. A lot of people suggested that maybe it has something to do with the cut CrimsonBat boss. The Smouldering Lake had an unused boss fight that was repurposed into the Demon Prince in the DLC. I have to admit to completely forgetting about this potential context. I'll link to a great video by Zuli the Witch that explains all of it, and what's interesting to me is that there were rumors that you'd shoot the CrimsonBat down with the ballista. Zuli took a somewhat skeptical approach to that rumor, which makes sense if you watch her video, but now I'm wondering if the floating enemy wall might not have been intended for a more mobile version of the Karthus sandworm at all, and as a lot of people suggested, if there was ever anything like a flying routine for the CrimsonBat in development. Maybe this is the vestigial remains of that instead. In the end, the CrimsonBat boss fight was supposed to be inside the same room as the old Demon King, at least at one point in development, but maybe it could have initially flown around this area, and then after wounding it with the ballista, it could have flown into the boss room like a wounded Calamite, or something. We don't have any solid evidence for this that I'm aware of, but it is a very good consideration that's fun to speculate on. And let's take another quick look at the mystery that I ended the video with, the weird invisible walls of collisions found only by the Judicators in the DLC. To recap, there's a unique kind of collision that wraps the bridge by the first Judicator, it covers a big chunk of the city area by the second Judicator, and it covers the various buildings and trees down in the water by the third Judicator. It's not used anywhere else in the game, but it's not an invisible wall for the player, the enemies, nor the camera. So what does it actually protect, and why was it invented for the DLC? I got a lot of comments suggesting that it probably has something to do with the enemies that the Judicators spawn, and I agree. Though the reason I didn't go into that further is that the specifics are very fuzzy to me. To start with, the extra enemies that the Judicators spawn aren't proper characters or NPCs. They're instead classified as something that the game refers to internally as bullets. Bullets are the system used for projectiles, meaning that what you see here isn't like a complete character model loading in. It's more like an offensive spell, where the look of the spell just happens to take the shape of something humanoid, rather than looking like a traditional cast of Soul Spear or whatever. There are pros and cons to using bullets to spawn temporary enemies in like this. If they used traditional NPCs for this, they'd likely have to populate the map with a ton of potential fixed spawn locations, and then dynamically ask them to spawn in based on distance to the player. You could do it that way, but did the devs really want to put like a couple hundred spawn locations down here in just the water area? Maybe that's not the best way to do that. By using bullets instead, the Judicator can theoretically just shoot at us wherever we're standing, and then these extra enemies can pop out based on wherever the bullet collides, not requiring any predetermined spawn locations for the enemies at all. And that would justify introducing a new kind of collision, one that only the Judicator's bullets interact with, to help contain where and how its summons spawn in. I'm pretty confident this is what's happening, but without doing a much deeper dive into the bullet system, and not currently having a way to visualize the exact behavior of the Judicator's bullets, the implementation here is a bit confusing. You might expect that there's a bunch of individual bullets firing at us, like all of the different archers here are spawning wherever they make contact with solid ground, and the invisible walls simply confine or put a limit on how far out they can go. But they actually spawn here in bulk. We can see this if we move the Judicator. We can get a bunch of archers to float where there's no collision at all, and in the same way that a bunch of archers are in higher elevation when they're on the bridge normally, we see the same thing here. So I think a single bullet is landing somewhere, and then all of these spawn around some invisible center point in a completely fixed orientation. But it's hard for me to make sense of the exact path the Judicator's bullets take, though. There are times where the Judicator casts a spell and no enemies pop out. It happens when I'm standing here, so I think there's some kind of line of sight rule to the bullets, maybe? Perhaps the Judicator is lobbing the bullet over the wall from here, with an arc like an invisible firebomb being thrown upwards, and when it explodes on the opposite side, perhaps the bullet can't see us and that's stopping the enemies from spawning in. If that were true, it would give a very obvious purpose to that collision, and it really appears to be the case when the enemies start spawning in again when I walk over here. It feels like they're spawning in because the bullet can see me again, and that would make sense. But then, like, I can stand over here, and suddenly the enemies can spawn and see me again, when I should be on the opposite side of this wall from both the Judicators and presumably the bullet it spawns, so I have no idea what's up with that. I do think that some funkiness with its bullets and these walls explains an odd behavior that you can find with the second Judicator down in the city. In completely normal gameplay, sometimes he just spams his summoning move with seemingly no effect at all. Without anything modded, just trying to get footage of his non-archer spawns down here was surprisingly awkward. Sometimes they show up, sometimes they don't. The behavior of their spawning feels really finicky and unintuitive. Remember when I said that there are pros and cons to spawning enemies like this with bullets? I think this might be where we're seeing that behave kind of poorly. The Judicator is clipped partially behind one of these invisible walls, and there's also a bunch more very tall walls around. I suspect that these bullets sometimes have a hard time seeing you, and that is likely the culprit here, whereas a system with fixed spawn locations probably would have been a much better fit for a location like this. But again, without seeing the exact behavior of the bullets here, we don't have a crystal clear look at the role the collisions are playing and why exactly their spawning is so scuffed. If anyone is able to provide a deeper dive into this, I'd love to see it. Okay, thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please consider doing all the usual things that help. You can also support this channel more directly by subscribing to my Patreon or becoming a YouTube member. I'd like to give an extra special thanks to all of my backers at the Evil Vagrant tier. Thanks for watching, and see y'all next time. I can finally get back to those Dark Souls 1 videos that I said I'd be working on.